Flood.
Well, I'm in Manchester Library and I've managed to find quite a bit of information on the mud floods, searching through lots of old newspaper archives. Libraries are very different than they were in my day, I'm telling you. Be as noisy as you fucking want in here. There was some cunt on the piano. We're in a different world, guys. Here's some information on the mud floods I've found. Hello and welcome to part 2 of my mud floods investigation. And as you can see there, I've ventured my way into Manchester Library. I thought, what better place to go and get some historical information on the city than the library, where they store all the newspaper articles from the past, going back a long way. And I went into the library and I asked them, you know, what old newspapers they had that I could look at. And it turns out that they've put it all onto a digital archive. And you can sit at a computer and search for the articles. Absolutely perfect. Brilliant resource. I only spent a couple of hours in there. You know, you could be there for days researching this. And I will be going back to get more information, in light of other stuff I've found since then as well. But this is the information I got this particular day. And what I'm going to be showing you now is screenshots that I've taken with my phone. I've taken a picture of the screen as I'm looking at it, because the way that these archives work, you can either search them from home, you could search these yourself, but you would have to pay for each article you look at. Or, if you look at them in the library itself, you get a free account with unlimited credits on it. And you can look at them all day long to your heart's content. So that's obviously what I did. Now, there was the option to print these articles off, but even the lady that was showing me how to do it didn't know how to do that. I could have worked it out, but each one cost, I think it was 15 pence for every single page that you printed off, and there was a lot of information there. So I've just taken pictures of the screen. They don't all come out great, but you get the idea. It's about the information, it's not about the quality of the picture at the end of the day. So let's have a look at these newspaper articles and see what we can learn from the news of the time. So, as I say, these articles, they don't all come out very clear on the screen. One, because they weren't very clear in the first place on the screen at the library, but then I was taking a photograph of the screen as well, and this is a good example where it doesn't come up very well. Now this article is, as you can see there, the boxes come up, little blue boxes around the word slide and mud, because that was a search term I'd use, and it just points them out to you. Now this story isn't per se about a mudslide in particular, but it's just interesting. It's talking about prostitutes, I'm assuming. There is an old saying, and a very true one: give a dog a bad name and bang it. Oh, and hang it, sorry. Yeah, bang it one, eh? I know it's prostitutes, but come on. So with Jarrow, it has got a bad name and keeps it. Since the Christmas time, a number of females have figured at the Jarrow Police Court and have been dealt with in various ways. Several going to Durham for a short holiday. That's the prison. Through inability to pay their way at the police station. The majority of these ladies, in quotes, belong to the nomad class and go wandering about the country from one town to another and living in the lodging houses. A few weeks ago, we were reading of a bog slide, which is an interesting term. We'll get more into that later. In Ireland, it seems as though there had been a mudslide in Jarrow, judging by the deplorable state of the streets are in now, that the frost has given and fresh weather has prevailed for a day or two. Has our esteemed surveyor, anyway, it's basically referring to a story in the press from a few weeks before about mudslides creating havoc in towns. These articles will actually come on to. But what I found interesting about this article is the way that they refer to these bog slides and mudslides as just quite a normal event. Bad events, much like the floodings here in Britain every year, maybe twice a year. We get heavy rains and certain areas of the country flood, and it's always the same areas time and time again, generally in places where local authorities have allowed planning permission to be granted on what's used as floodplains, where natural rivers flood over. And that land, a lot of them are golf courses and places like that, where it can sustain a flood and then it doesn't harm people. But now properties are allowed to be built on these floodplains. Even in this day and age, when we know all about these things, it's ridiculous that it's allowed to happen, but it does. And you'll see news reports on it year in, year out, and this is what I'm seeing here about mud floods. It does seem that we expect these events to happen year in, year out, and the way it's sort of referred to in that article there shows you it's an expected and common event, one that's frowned upon because the authorities aren't doing enough about it. But in this story that's not related to mud floods or mudslides in any way, they just mention it in passing and use it as a reference to say how bad the situation is with these prostitutes. And so it came over like that to me in a way of this is a regular event and not out of the ordinary. This next story is another good example of that. This is a letter to the editor of the Leicester Daily Post. It's from Friday the 16th of November 1877. Sir, I have read accounts last year of the mud baths in Evington Lane. Now, interesting term there as well, mud baths. Yet another term that's used at the time with mudslides and bog slides. But again, winter is upon us and nothing has been done. Yes, winter has come. For in Evington Lane, I think that's supposed to be Lane, I have seen people, apparently respectable people, sliding on the footpath, or rather where the footpath ought to be, but is not. Fathers of families carry their children lest they should step on the mudslides, and husbands anxiously point out to their wives the spots which appear sound and are likely to afford a chance of safe footing. I ask, where are the police whose duty it is to stop the making of these mudslides, which endanger the limbs, if not the lives of pedestrians? And I found that interesting, that it was the police's job to prevent these mudslides. I suppose back then we didn't have all these departments that we have today, all these various governmental departments, and I suppose we think of them as quite, you know, like the health and safety and all this lot. Well, nowadays it would be the health and safety executive here in Britain that would be in charge of it. We do think they're overkill sometimes, but as you can see, you know, if the police were expected to stop mudslides, what were they supposed to do? Arrest the mud as it was coming in? But he's basically pointing out here the fact that this is an ongoing problem year in, year out, and it's not being dealt with. It's an expected event. Now, this next article isn't about a particular mudslide event or anything, but again, it just references in a way that suggests to me that these really were regular events. This is from Saturday the 19th of September, wrong screen there, Saturday the 19th of September 1891, and it goes on, the descent to the shore is very precipitous and rugged, a rough pathway curls, and it goes on and on. If you look down near the bottom of the article there though, where you can see the box around the words mudslide, it's talking about lands near the shore, and so these are very wet lands and everything. One must say, because the landscape looks so different in a rainstorm or wind, and certainly it was rainy at, and I can't read the name of that, Speeton or something. Sometimes the slope was rendered unscalable by the mudslide. The sea became invisible. Now, as you can see there again, it's just another reference to mudslides. It seems that the way we build our towns and cities nowadays, we concrete a lot, we put drainage in. At the times, they wouldn't have had the same sort of infrastructure as we have now, and so in heavy rainstorms, after prolonged ice periods and snow periods, it does appear to me that as that melted, the runoff from that came down with a lot of mud in it, and you see this in the rivers nowadays, after it's been snowing in the area. And I'll show you some footage here of my local river coming up to the banks, where you can see that the water's very muddy, so you do get a lot of the mud in the melt off and the runoff from these events. What I have found some evidence of, not a great deal yet, but I'm still looking, is of a mini ice age at the time. So they would have had much colder winters, more prolonged periods, and therefore when the melt off came every year, you would have had these mudslides, mud floods coming through towns on a regular basis. I do wonder whether this happened as one catastrophic event, or whether it built up over years and years, and because it was year in, year out, they were unable to keep on top of it, because apparently it was down to the police to keep on top of this, keeping law and order. So although it does go on, my research here, and does explain, you know, certain events that may have made it worse some years than others, and maybe one year was quite catastrophic, but we'll go on with the investigation. Now again, we've got a story here. This is from Friday the 26th of April 1895, and the whole thing is just about the House of Lords not doing their bit. Amazing it doesn't mention the House of Commons there. Maybe that was invented after then. But anyway, it's just, you know, like the news of the day, talking about how inadequate the government is. Some things never change. We can ignore most of the article because it's pretty unreadable, but if we just go down to, again, where mudslide is boxed there, down the bottom left-hand side, it's just the way they refer to it. They talk about an obstruction, a block in somewhere that's not been removed, and they say in there, you know, the first thing I should do would be to remove the obstruction, supposing that there was to be a snowdrift or a mudslide or the fall of a tunnel. So it's just put into context of other things that would be considered disasters in the day. It's just another prevalent example of where basically, you know, they're referring to it as an expected but disastrous event occurring. Now, this next story, it was the first time I'd seen this as a title in a story, and really sort of became aware of this term. But if we have a look at it, it's the Sliding Bog. This is from Wednesday the 30th of September 1896. I'll zoom in a bit because it brings the text up a little bit better. Finding of bodies. A report received on Tuesday night was to the effect that a change for the better had taken place at Rathmore, the Sliding Bog having for the time at least ceased. The bodies of Mr. and Mrs. Donnelly had then... can't read what that says. Thousands of people continued to visit the scene of the disaster, and it was easy to see how wide and extensive and serious had been the damage. The district is known as Quarry Lodge, that being the local name applied to the Earl of Kenharn's quarry in the vicinity. This is the only quarry for miles around. So this has happened near a quarry, but it just shows that, you know, this mudslides, bog slides and stuff like that, they were happening. You could put it down to it being a quarry, and maybe it was all the stuff stored at the side, you know, like the sort of the slag heaps and stuff like that. Assuming it was a stone quarry, I don't know. One peculiar feature of the quarry, which appears to have escaped notice, was the existence of an underground stream which emptied itself into the quarry through a large fissure in the rock. The stream at times discharged a large quantity of water which found exit through a cutting in another stream, which eventually discharged itself into the River Flesk, which flows into the lakes of Kilmarnsey. This was, of course, the course which the enormous mass of Sliding Bog ultimately took. The existence of the quarry stream points clearly enough to the underground condition of the county beyond and above the quarry. So this has been brought on by an underground stream going under the mud and then bringing it on. Just another way that I thought these things could happen, and when we're building new areas up and you know, like using new building techniques, as we've seen in modern day, you know, you get the floods in low-lying areas. This probably was something that changed the way and the places where they built buildings because of this. Inevitably, though, some of them will have remained in place and will have been sort of, you know, subject to these conditions as and when they occurred. Now, as we go further into this article, I'll jump ahead a little bit because it does go on. But it does start to describe the consistency of the mud and everything. He talks here that, you know, they found the bodies, searching in the mud for the bodies of Donnelly and his wife and children. And as we drove up, we nearly missed the body of Mrs. Donnelly. I think it's actually the next page that details it more. Yeah, the horror of the visitation. To make any, they were dazed and helpless looking. The body was placed on a country cart, and the people walked silently behind it. It was pathetic to listen to the peasants, endeavouring to identify old familiar spots in the bogland, with the conformation of the region so radically altered by the all-spreading peat. An estimate of the extent of the bog slide is at present out of the question, but that it is vast and amply evidenced all around. It changed the whole area, made a lot of it unrecognisable, even to the peasants. It's nice, isn't it? That suggests it's on the same kind of scale that, you know, you would expect these mudslides that have half-covered buildings to be. Quarrying was much more widespread back then, probably worldwide as well. People needed stone everywhere, didn't they? It easily swallowed up the little cottage in its downward course to the little vale, and must have been an awful demonstration of the forces of nature. There is no trace of the familiar reddish-brown scrub, nothing but hills and hollows covered with mire, testifying to a terrible revolution. It was easy to follow the main course of the moving mire. Just before reaching the bridge mentioned above, it encountered a shoulder of land which effectively diverted the rush. To this fact, Mr. Morgan McSweeney, who resides just beyond, probably owes his life. And it goes on to say another move reported, and it was, you know, on the move again kind of thing. So I just found that interesting that you know, it describes the exact conditions we're thinking of when we think of these mud floods. This next story again talks about a bog slide. This is from the Yorkshire Evening Post, Monday the 4th of January 1897. Scientists and the bog slide. It was not to be expected that science would remain inactive while so remarkable a natural phenomenon as the bog slide was to be seen. Near Killarney's lakes and fells, consequently for scientists deputed by the Royal Dublin Society, visited the scene on Saturday and are now inquiring into the causes and nature of the disaster. Photographs of the mountain and quarry were taken and measurements made with a view to making up an accurate map of the mountain bed where the slip originated and the course traversed by the boggy flood. A great change has come over the face of the mountain. The old scenery has vanished forever. There was a time when it could be crossed in safety, but now no human on foot can do so. The party of scientific inquirers had to use the greatest caution, and they had to thank that caution and their long sticks for the fact that they were not buried in the mud. The mountain is full of gasping fissures, as if the surface had been forcibly torn open. This is not a result to be surprised at, considering the enormous force of the boggy current tearing down the valley. 10 million cubic yards of heavy mud, or roughly speaking, a fourth of the amount of soil excavated from the Manchester Ship Canal, was a mass against which resistance was futile. Maybe some worldwide catastrophic event had happened at one point, which affected more than just one area like this, but affected the whole world. Are we going to see evidence of that? Well, let's continue. Now, this next story is very short. It's a single paragraph, but it's something that when I go back I'll be looking up more on this. It's from Saturday, February the 11th, 1893. The floods in Queensland have now considerably subsided. Brisbane City, however, is said to be covered with mud, a most nauseous stench in consequence prevails. I'm going to be looking more into that event to get some more details on that. There is also another event from very close to there. If I go back, I've saved this till last because I actually found it halfway through looking at these stories, but the way this storyline's progressed along, I think it's more apt to bring it in now. The volcanic eruption in New Zealand. Now, this is from 1886, so it's not connected to that event we've just looked at. The New Zealand papers to hand contain accounts of the terrible volcanic eruptions in the Hot Lake District. The Auckland Star of Saturday, June the 19th says, on the morning of Thursday the 10th of June, New Zealand land was startled from one end to the other by the alarming intelligence that a violent volcanic eruption had taken place at Rotorua in the Hot Lakes district of the North Island. They didn't like commas in those days, did they? Long before the telegraph had flashed the tidings far and wide, places so far apart as Auckland, Nelson and Christchurch had been alarmed by hearing during the time early morning loud atmospheric concussions such are produced by heavy discharges. Concussions such, same line, discharges of artillery. From Auckland, flashes of fire could also be seen on the southern horizon, and many people who had risen from bed to witness the phenomena were convinced that the catastrophe of no ordinary kind had occurred. By 9 o'clock, the news was published that an outbreak of volcanic energy unparalleled in the history of New Zealand and recalling the most noted eruptions of Etna and Vesuvius had taken place. This is where this gets interesting. The belt of activity, which we would fain consider the safety valve of the North Island, extends from Tongariro at one end to White Island at the other, a distance of about 150 miles. At its widest, it's 210 miles broad. White Island has undergone considerable changes from volcanic action during recent years, and Tongariro was last in eruption during July 1871. If we go to the next page of this article, though, Tarawera Mountain, the source of the first eruption, stands on the southern edge of the lake of the same name. Towering up some 2,000 feet, it was anciently a volcano, as two craters testified. But the Maoris had no traditions or legends as to ever having been in a state of activity. For 5 centuries at least, and doubtless much longer, the mountain had been in the same quiet state, and it was until the fatal 10th of June. With the natives, it was very sacred, and few eruptions have been able to break the tape and ascend to the top. For 15 generations, the Maoris are said to have carried their dead to the summit, where thousands of bleaching skeletons were to be seen on this lofty burial place prior to the catastrophe. So this volcano was basically extinct, and even going back in the Maori legends, there was no, for at least 5 centuries, no activity from this thing, and all of a sudden it erupted around this time. What I'm going to be looking for now is details of other eruptions around these times, just to see if there was a worldwide sort of event, or well, several worldwide events that did this. Does this tie into the mini ice age that was reported around this time as well? And I'm going to try and find some more details on that. And that will all be in part 3. So what I'm thinking here is extinct volcanoes suddenly erupting, and these mudslides, bog slides, they were quite regular events, but made worse by a huge worldwide catastrophic, several eruptions of volcanoes kind of thing, throwing up ash and mud the way we've heard described in here. If that's going to be, this is what I'm thinking is possibly the case, and whether these could well have been man-made events. We know they've got the technology today to do this kind of thing, and from what I've found linking into the Tartarian Society, which I've got to say did not exist for me in the old world. Russia was always Russia. I'd never heard of these Tartars. In fact, the first time I heard of Tartars was when Crimea broke away from Ukraine and went back to Russia, which is what happened. Russia didn't annex it. Russia didn't go in with the military and take over. They held a referendum and they decided to go with their more traditional roots in the what Russia calls the motherland, and they probably do too, due to the fact of it being, you know, where Tartaria was. So I'm seeing links there, and possibly that they did have the technology to bring on such things as volcano eruptions, the same way we can today, by shooting certain waves up into the atmosphere, bouncing them off, and allegedly bouncing them off. I don't see how they do that, but certainly they can use what they call schema technology, things like HAARP, to send out certain frequencies, and the really low level frequencies can cause earthquakes, eruptions and things like that. So that's what I'm going to be looking at, and that for today is when I left the library. I'm going. With the piano playing woman behind. Fucking hell. Okay, I'm just opposite the old Granada Studios building there, just being transformed into hotels now, and very interesting. Old window bricked up there, top lintels above the window. It's do match the lintels above the next window up. These are people's offices, so I've got to be a bit careful here how I'm filming. Don't want to film in the windows. Goes like this all the way up until you get to here, and these have reopened the windows up here. When you look down, it does look like they went a lot further than that. Very interesting how most of these windows have been bricked up now, but these ones are reopened again. When you get to here, and you can't see any sign of lower windows there or there, but where they're completely covered up at this end of the building. But this is on Key Street. and it's a flat road, it's not even on a hill, so that's odd. Well, I'm looking at the old Coronation Street set here, or what's left of it anyway. The old garage is at the top of the road, the old nightclub. You can just see in the middle there, that was the street that was behind Coronation Street, that you could see through that tunnel. There's a lorry blocking the way at the moment, and that was the top of the street. Well, yeah, there you go, and that's where the old railway bridge, the made up one. Very interesting. Look at the different brickwork at the bottom. As you go up the brickwork, this looks more replaced, and this window actually goes down quite a distance. You can get it to focus there. It was at the original bottom of these windows, and this doorway that goes down, was this restored? The entrance to it. If you know Roman numerals, you'll be able to date that, I'm sure. And the windows come around this side, and they're even more hidden on this side, and therefore bricked in than they were back on the other street. We're on Duke Street side now. And again, raised entrance to the building. Now a lot of these buildings have been knocked down and rebuilt. You can tell brand new brickwork there on that building. Someone's knocking on the window at me there. Fuck off. This much older building, as you can see from the brickworks. Again, raised entrance. And old bricked up windows at the bottom. This is junction of Duke Street and Bridgewater Street there. Now, you can't tell with this building here because they've obviously redone it all for shop purposes. They've refronted it, but I'm pretty sure that would have been the same as these buildings, having the stuff half buried. You can see it more on this side of the street as well. There used to be windows there, but why would you have windows that low? Obviously something's happened there. Now it seems to have come down from top to bottom here, because they're more exposed at the bottom here than they are at the top here. That's been reworked anyway, that one, but I believe that was the old doorway and they made it into a window now. Old Roman fort wall managed to survive the mud flood. This is a replica that's been rebuilt, but it's interesting, I suppose. This is the North Gate. By the middle of the 2nd century AD, the Roman fort of Mancunium, not Mancunium, Niconium, Mamnum, I can't even pronounce that, was rectangular in shape and had 4 gates located at each of its 4 sides. You are now standing in front of the North Gate of the fort. This is built on the Roman road which crossed the fort's outer defences and ran out into the heart of civilian settlement. Originally it was buried. We're at the principal building on Oxford Street now. And here we go with these half windows again. It does seem here that it came from the top near the library, St Peter's Square, where the St Peterloo happened. And then you've got these half windows that actually increase in size as we go along here. And of course it is a raised entrance, of course, into the front there. But as we come down here, you can see these windows get actually bigger and bigger, as if less was covered up here. You know, you can see them getting bigger and bigger until you get to this one here where it's a complete window above the ground. Then you've got the assurance building here, so there's no cyclists coming. Now here, the doorway sized. So they go from tiny little windows at the top all the way down to these full size, massive, as big as doors. So did the mudslide stop a little bit further up there? This was all left unexposed, or not as much anyway. When you look at the size of the windows above, they're obviously even bigger than these ones. So I do think we lost some land here.